The tile floor is cold against my cheek and somewhere above me. Jake sighs with the kind of irritation usually reserved for delayed flights or burnt toast. Not, I think bitterly, for his pregnant wife sprawled across our kitchen floor. I'm Nova, and this isn't how I pictured sharing my pregnancy news with my husband. You really need to stop being so dramatic, Jake says, his voice floating down from what seems like miles away. I have a meeting in 20 minutes. The room spins as I try to push myself up. My fingers slip against the smooth tiles, and the morning sickness hits again, harder this time. I barely make it to my knees before retching into the sink. Jesus Christ, Nova. Jake's footsteps retreat. I'll be late. Don't leave, I manage between heaves. Please. I need to tell you something. The footsteps pause. I hear him adjusting his tie, that expensive silk one his mother gave him last Christmas. Can it wait? I have the Thompson project presentation today. I grip the counter, pulling myself upright. The world tilts dangerously, but I force myself to turn and face him. I'm pregnant. Jake's face goes blank, like someone hit pause on a video. His hand freezes mid-tie adjustment. What? 8 weeks, I say. I found out yesterday. He blinks rapidly, his jaw working. Are you sure? 3 tests and a doctor's appointment, sure. Jake's eyes dart around the kitchen, landing anywhere but on me. He checks his watch. Look, we'll talk about this tonight. I really can't be late for this meeting. Tonight? My voice cracks. Jake, I just told you we're having a baby. And that's big news. He grabs his briefcase from the counter. But Maya's been working on this presentation for weeks, and if I'm not there to support her... Maya, something cold settles in my stomach, heavier than morning sickness. Your new coworker, Maya? Project partner, he corrects automatically. Listen, we'll figure this out later, okay? Take some ginger ale or something. Before I can respond, he's gone. The front door closes with a decisive click that echoes through our suddenly too large house. I slide back down to the floor, pressing my forehead against the cabinet door. My phone buzzes. A text from Helen, Jake's mother. Lunch today? We need to discuss the country club membership. I close my eyes, remembering how she cornered me at last week's family dinner. When are you two finally giving me grandchildren? She demanded. Jake's not getting any younger. My hand drifts to my still flat stomach. Neither am I'd replied, forcing a smile while Jake pretended to be fascinated by his phone. The irony would be funny if I wasn't sitting here alone, trying not to throw up again. I text Helen back, can't today. Not feeling well. Her response is immediate. You're always not feeling well lately. Jake works so hard. He deserves a wife who can keep up with social obligations. Something snaps inside me. Maybe it's the hormones, or maybe it's the way Jake looked right through me as he rushed to support Maya. Or maybe it's just that I'm tired of pretending everything's fine when it's so clearly not. I grab my phone and pull up Jake's calendar, the one he thinks I don't know how to access. There it is. Thompson project meeting, 9:30 a.m. But there's another entry, hidden in his personal calendar. Lunch, 1 p.m. My hands shake as I screenshot the entry. The nausea returns, but this time it has nothing to do with morning sickness. You're right, Helen, I text back. Jake does work very hard. Especially with his new project partner, Maya. Maybe we should all have lunch together sometime? I hit send before I can change my mind, then block her number. Standing up slowly, I steady myself against the counter and look around our pristine kitchen. With its matching appliances and coordinated color scheme. Everything perfectly in place, just like Jake likes it. Well, almost everything. 3 weeks have passed, and Jake's chair sits empty at dinner again. His excuses pile up like the takeout containers in our trash, late meetings, client emergencies, networking events. Tonight it's drinks with potential investors, though his calendar still shows that mysterious M entry. I push my untouched pasta around the plate, fighting another wave of nausea. The smell of garlic, once my favorite, now makes my stomach roll. My phone lights up with a text from Helen. Jake tells me you've been difficult about the country club events. This isn't how we do things in this family. The fork clatters against porcelain. I delete the message without responding, but another follows. I'm coming over tomorrow. We need to talk about your priorities. The front door opens just as I'm dumping my dinner in the trash. Jake's cologne hits me first, different from his usual scent, sweeter somehow. More feminine. You're home early, I say, not turning around. Meeting wrapped up faster than expected. His voice is careful, measured. Mother called. She's worried about you. Fascinating. I start loading the dishwasher, each plate a controlled slam. Did she mention I'm carrying her grandchild, or just my apparent failure as a society wife? Jake sighs. Nova, don't start. I'm tired. Tired. I spin around, a water glass clutched too tightly in my hand. You want to talk about tired? Try growing a human while your husband. The words die in my throat. There's a smudge of red on his collar, lipstick, badly wiped away. My fingers go numb, and the glass slips, shattering at my feet. Don't move, Jake says, stepping forward. You'll cut yourself. Stay back. My voice sounds strange, distant. I've got it. You're being ridiculous. Let me help. Like you helped at my first ultrasound appointment? The words come out sharp as the glass around my feet. Oh, wait. You had that emergency meeting with Maya. His face tightens. The Thompson Project is crucial for my career. Is that what we're calling it now? What's that supposed to mean? I laugh, and it sounds all wrong. Your mother's coming over tomorrow. Should I tell her about the lipstick on your collar, or would you prefer to explain it yourself? Jake's hand flies to his neck, then drops. Something cold and calculating crosses his face. You're hormonal. Imagining things. This pregnancy is clearly affecting your judgment. Don't. My hands shake as I reach for the broom. Don't you dare try to gaslight me. I'm not. His phone buzzes, and he glances at it reflexively. His expression softens for a fraction of a second before he catches himself. Is that another emergency meeting? I ask quietly. Client follow-up. He backs toward the door. I need to take this. Of course you do. He pauses in the doorway. We'll talk tomorrow after you've calmed down. Mother will help you see reason. The door closes behind him, and I'm alone with the broken glass again. My phone pings another message from Helen. Jake says you're becoming unstable. We need to discuss medication options. Slowly, deliberately, I open my laptop and pull up the tracking app one installed on Jake's phone last week. The moves steadily across the map, not toward his office, but toward the expensive apartment complex where Maya lives. I open a new document and start typing. Day 21 of surveillance. Subject left house at 9:47 p.m. after gaslighting attempt. Current location. I add screenshots of his location, the calendar entries, photos of the lipstick stain. My hand drifts to my stomach where our child grows, unaware of their father's betrayal. I'm sorry, I whisper, but I promise you won't grow up watching your mother be made a fool of. The tracking dot stops moving. I check the address and add it to my growing file of evidence. Tomorrow, Helen wants to discuss my priorities? Perfect. I'll have plenty to discuss with her too. I close the laptop and start sweeping up the broken glass, each shard a promise of what's to come. They want to paint me as unstable? Fine. Let them. They have no idea what I'm capable of when I'm thinking clearly. And right now, my mind has never been clearer. Jake's car key feels heavy in my palm as I stand in our garage at dawn. He's still asleep upstairs, dead to the world after coming home at 3 a.m., reeking of whiskey and perfume. The same perfume that's been clinging to his clothes for weeks now. I shouldn't be doing this. The rational part of my brain screams to walk away, but my feet carry me to his pristine BMW anyway. My hands shake as I unlock it, sliding into the driver's seat that still holds the impression of his body. The center console yields nothing but receipts and breath mints. The glove compartment contains only maintenance records and insurance papers. I'm about to give up when I notice the slight gap under the passenger seat. My fingers brush against something hard, a phone. Older model, no password protection. The screen lights up, revealing dozens of messages from M. Miss you already. Last night was incredible. When can you get away again? Each message burns like acid in my throat. But it's the photos that break me. Jake and Maya at restaurants I've never been to, at concerts he claimed he was too busy to attend with me. Her head on his shoulder, his hand on her waist. Both of them laughing at some private joke while I've been home battling morning sickness alone. The garage door rumbles to life. I freeze, clutching the phone. Jake appears in the doorway, his face shifting from confusion to rage as he spots me in his car. "What the hell are you doing?" "Research," I say, my voice steadier than I feel. "For the Thompson project." "Fascinating stuff." He crosses the garage in 3 strides. "Give me the phone." "Why?" "Afraid Helen might see these lovely dinner dates? Or maybe your boss would be interested in how you've been spending those late nights at the office." "You're making a mistake." His voice drops dangerously low. "Think about what you're doing." "I have been. For weeks." I hold up the phone. "While you've been thinking about Maya." He lunges for the phone, but I'm faster. "Don't," I warn. "I've already backed everything up." "You're hysterical," he spits. This is exactly why I needed. He stops himself, but the damage is done. "Needed what, Jake?" "Someone who isn't pregnant and inconvenient." "This isn't you," he says, switching tactics. "The hormones are making you paranoid. Let me help you." I laugh, and it sounds like breaking glass. "Help me? Like you helped Maya climb the corporate ladder?" "On her back, apparently." His hand shoots out, grabbing my wrist. The phone clatters to the floor. "You're embarrassing yourself." "No," I wrench away, "I'm exposing you." "Think carefully about your next move," he says quietly. "Who do you think they'll believe? The successful executive or his unstable, hormonal wife?" "That's why you've been laying the groundwork with Helen, isn't it? Painting me as unhinged?" The pieces click into place. "How long have you been planning this?" He doesn't answer, but his silence says everything. "You know what's funny?" I retrieve the phone, my hands steady now. "I actually thought this baby would bring us closer. Instead, it just showed me who you really are." "Nova." "Save it." I head for the door, then pause. "Oh, and Jake?" "Maya's not the only one who knows how to document things. Check your email. I just sent you some interesting screenshots. I think Helen and your boss might find them enlightening." The color drains from his face. "You wouldn't dare." "The old Nova wouldn't, I agree. But you killed her. Congratulations on creating something much worse." I leave him standing in the garage, staring at his phone as messages start flooding in. Helen's name flashes on his screen, followed by his boss's. My hand rests on my stomach as I walk away, feeling stronger with each step. They wanted to paint me as unstable? Fine. But they forgot one crucial detail: a mother protecting her child is capable of anything. And I'm just getting started. The doctor's voice fades into white noise as I stare at the ultrasound monitor. "Bed rest," she's saying. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high. You need to stop working immediately." My hand tightens around the prescription she's trying to give me. "I can't afford to stop working." She frowns, glancing at my empty ring finger. "I stopped wearing Jake's ring last week." "Is there someone who can help support you during this time?" The irony makes me laugh, but it comes out as more of a sob. "Yesterday, Jake drained our joint account." "For legal preparations," his email said. "Given your recent unstable behavior." "I'll figure something out," I tell her, but my voice sounds hollow even to me. Back home, I find Jake waiting in the kitchen. He's wearing his court suit, the one that costs more than 3 months of my salary. "We need to talk about your leave of absence," he says, not looking up from his phone. "The company's concerned about the project timeline." "The company or Maya?" His jaw tightens. "I'm trying to be reasonable here. You can't just stop working and expect." "The doctor says I have to." Convenient timing. He finally looks at me, his expression calculated. "Right after you tried to blackmail me." "Blackmail?" I grip the counter as the room sways slightly. "You mean exposing your affair?" The board sees it differently. His smile is cold. "They're very concerned about workplace harassment." "Maya's quite upset about your accusations." The pieces click into place. "You're having me fired." "You're being offered a generous severance package." "Contingent on signing an NDA, of course." My legs give out, and I sink into a chair. "I'm carrying your child." "Allegedly." He slides a document across the table. "We'll need a paternity test." The room goes very quiet. I can hear the clock ticking, marking seconds that feel like years. You know it's yours. Do I? Given your emotional state lately. He shrugs. My lawyer suggests we explore all possibilities. Your lawyer. My voice sounds strange, distant. The one you hired with our savings? I had to protect myself. He stands, straightening his tie. The severance papers need to be signed by Friday. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. As he turns to leave, I notice something fall from his pocket, a receipt. I wait until he's gone before picking it up. It's from a jewelry store, dated yesterday. The amount makes my head spin. My phone buzzes, a text from an unknown number. It's a photo of Maya, wearing a diamond ring that matches the receipt's description. Below it, a message. Thought you should know. He's not just leaving you, he's replacing you. The contact information shows it's from someone in Jake's office. Seems I'm not the only one he's made enemies of. My laptop sits on the counter, still open to our banking records. A notification pops up, another transfer from our joint account to his private one. The bastard's not just trying to leave me, he's trying to leave me destitute. The baby kicks, as if sensing my distress. I press a hand to my stomach, feeling the movement that reminds me what I'm fighting for. It's okay, I whisper, but I'm not sure who I'm trying to convince. We're okay. My phone buzzes again. This time it's my mother, your father, and I just got a concerning call from Helen. What's going on? I stare at the message, then at the severance papers. Then at the receipt that proves Jake's already planning his new life while systematically destroying mine. The baby kicks again, stronger this time. Right. This isn't just about me anymore. I reach for my phone, but instead of calling my mother, I dial a different number, the forensic accountant whose card I've been carrying since I first suspected Jake's affair. Hello, I say, my voice steady for the first time today. I need help tracking some suspicious financial transactions. How soon can we meet? The forensic accountant's findings sit heavy in my lap as I wait in Helen's pristine living room. The numbers blur together. Offshore accounts, hidden assets, systematic financial abuse spanning our entire marriage. Jake hasn't just been planning to leave me. He's been preparing for years. Helen sweeps in, perfectly coiffed as always. Nova, dear, you look dreadful. Have you been taking those anxiety medications Jake mentioned? Actually, I start to respond, but the room suddenly tilts. Black spots dance across my vision. Nova? Helen's voice shifts from condescending to concerned. Nova. I wake up in the hospital, the steady beep of monitors marking time. Helen sits beside me, her makeup smeared, something I've never seen before. Your blood pressure bottomed out, she says quietly. The baby, my hands fly to my stomach, is stable. For now. She picks up my chart, squinting through designer frames. But they're concerned about preeclampsia. Nova, why didn't you tell anyone how bad things were? I laugh, but it comes out as a sob. I tried. You told me I was being dramatic. She flinches. I thought. Jake said. Jake says a lot of things. I pull the accountant's report from my bag. Like how he's been funneling money into secret accounts since before our wedding. Helen's hands shake as she reads. Her face grows paler with each page. This can't be right. My son wouldn't. Check the transfers to Maya Thompson. My voice sounds distant, clinical. They started 6 months ago, right when I got pregnant. She flips pages frantically until she finds it. Her sharp intake of breath tells me she's seen the engagement ring purchase. I'm going to be sick, she whispers. That's how I felt when the door opens, cutting me off. Jake strides in, Maya trailing behind him. They freeze at the sight of Helen. Mother, Jake recovers quickly. You shouldn't be here. Nova's been making wild accusations. About the money you've been hiding? Helen's voice could freeze hell. Or about your pregnant mistress? Maya's hand flies to her stomach. The gesture is unconscious, instinctive, and damning. The monitors start beeping faster as the pieces click into place. You're pregnant. Jake steps forward, all smooth concern. Nova, you need to calm down. Don't you dare. Helen rises, a lioness protecting her cub. How long? 3 months, Maya whispers. The timeline hits me like a physical blow. He got her pregnant while I was battling morning sickness, while I was trying to save our marriage. Get out. Helen's voice trembles with rage. Both of you. Mother, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. She holds up the financial report. I understand you're not just a cheater, but a thief. I understand you've been systematically destroying your wife while building a life with her. The monitors shriek as my vision blurs again. Nova. Helen's voice seems to come from very far away. I need help in here. Medical staff flood the room. Through the chaos, I see Jake being forcibly removed, his protests lost in the commotion. The last thing I hear before consciousness fades is Helen's voice, steel-sharp and certain. Call my lawyer. Now. I surface briefly, catching fragments of conversation. Emergency C-section if her pressure doesn't stabilize. Restraining order against the husband. Financial forensics team. Helen's hand grips mine. I was wrong about everything, she whispers. But I'm here now. We're going to destroy him, Nova. For both our grandchildren. The monitors steady as I process her words. Jake didn't just betray me. He betrayed his mother, his unborn child, his entire family legacy. And Helen, with her social connections and financial power, has just become my most powerful ally. I squeeze her hand back, letting her feel my response. We don't need words anymore. We both understand what needs to be done. The game has changed. This isn't just about revenge anymore, it's about justice. And with Helen Adams on my side, Jake is about to learn exactly what it means to lose everything. The house feels different when Helen and I return from the hospital. Maybe it's the way Jake's left dirty dishes everywhere, or how his and Maya's clothes litter our bedroom floor. He's been living like a bachelor while I fought for our baby's life. Don't touch anything, Helen says, photographing each room. The lawyers need to see how he's treated the marital home. I nod, one hand on my still-swollen belly. The doctors managed to stabilize us both, but one wrong move could send me back to the hospital. Or worse. The front door opens. Jake stumbles in, reeking of expensive scotch. He freezes when he sees us. You're not supposed to be here, he slurs. The restraining order applies to you, not us. Helen's voice could cut glass. This is still Nova's legal residence. He laughs, ugly and sharp. Not for long. Maya's already picked out new curtains. My legs threaten to give out, but I force myself to stand straight. Where's the nursery furniture? Sold it. He shrugs. Maya wanted different stuff for our baby. The room spins. Helen grabs my arm, steadying me. You sold. I can't finish the sentence. Along with your grandmother's jewelry. He smirks. Should have kept better track of your things, Nova. Helen's grip tightens. Those were family heirlooms. We're being the operative word. Jake loosens his tie. Like this marriage. Past tense. The court might see it differently, Helen says, once they review the financial records. Something shifts in Jake's eyes, a flash of fear quickly masked by anger. You really want to play this game? I can make things very difficult. More difficult than trying to kill your child? The words escape before I can stop them. He steps forward, menacing. Careful, Nova. Stress isn't good for your condition, remember. Are you threatening her? Helen moves between us. Just stating facts. His smile turns cruel. Like the fact that Maya's pregnancy is progressing perfectly. No complications. No drama. Maybe the problem isn't the stress, Nova. Maybe it's just you. The baby kicks hard, as if protesting. I press a hand to my side, and Jake's eyes follow the movement. Don't worry, he says softly. Once the paternity test proves that child isn't mine, you won't have to pretend anymore. We both know it's yours, I whisper. Do we? He pulls out his phone. Because I have some interesting security footage from the office. You and that IT guy working late. He lets the implication hang. That's a lie. Truth is whatever I can prove in court. He shows us the screen, doctored footage of me with a male colleague. Amazing what money can buy these days. My knees buckle. Helen catches me as Jake continues, the board already thinks you're unstable. Add infidelity charges and well. Who would believe anything you say about our finances? You bastard, Helen hisses. Careful, mother. You're one signature away from losing your position on the family trust. Sure you want to pick sides. The room goes quiet except for the sound of my ragged breathing. Jake moves toward the stairs, then pauses. Oh, and Nova? Maya's wearing your grandmother's sapphire ring. Looks better on her anyway. He disappears upstairs, leaving us in the wreckage of what was once my life. Helen's hands shake as she helps me to a chair. He's thought of everything, I whisper. Not everything. Helen pulls out her phone, stopping the recording. He just confessed to selling stolen property and fabricating evidence. While drunk. I stare at her, hope warring with despair. Will it be enough? Alone? No. She squeezes my hand. But combined with what else we have? It's a start. Upstairs, we hear Jake talking, presumably to Maya. Planning their perfect future while systematically destroying mine. I can't lose this baby, I say. I can't lose everything. You won't. Helen's voice hardens with resolve. Because we're going to take everything from him first. The baby kicks again, stronger this time. Like a signal. Like a promise. The boardroom falls silent as I walk in, Helen at my side. Jake's face drains of color when he sees us. Maya, sitting beside him, touches her stomach protectively, a gesture that might have sparked sympathy in me once. Not anymore. This is a closed meeting, Jake says, but his voice wavers. Helen smiles, razor sharp. As major shareholders, we have every right to be here. The board members shift uncomfortably. Jake's boss, Richard, clears his throat. Mrs. Adams, given the circumstances. The circumstances, I interrupt, placing a USB drive on the table, are exactly why we're here. Jake lunges for the drive, but Helen's already connected it to the projector. The screen fills with financial records, transfers, hidden accounts, falsified expense reports. What is this? Richard demands. Evidence of systematic embezzlement, Helen says. Using company resources to fund a personal lifestyle, including gifts for certain employees. Her eyes cut to Maya's ring, my grandmother's sapphire glinting accusingly. Maya's hand drops to her lap. Jake stands, desperate. These documents are clearly fabricated. Nova's unstable. Like the security footage you doctored? I play his drunken confession through my phone. The room goes deadly quiet. You recorded me illegally, he snarls. Actually, Helen produces a document. As co-owner of the residence, Nova had every right to record conversations in her home. Unlike someone who falsified company records. Richard's face darkens as he reviews the evidence. Jake, is this true? Of course not. This is a vindictive attack by my pregnant ex. Soon-to-be ex, I correct. And I'm not the only one who's pregnant, am I, Maya? Maya pales. Several board members gasp. That's irrelevant, Jake snaps. Is it? Helen pulls out another document. Because according to company policy, relationships between supervisors and direct reports must be disclosed. Especially when said supervisor is authorizing bonuses and promotions. Maya stands abruptly. I need to. Sit down, Jake hisses, grabbing her arm. Don't touch me. She jerks away. You said this would never come out. You promised. Maya, he warns, but she's unraveling. You said you'd handle everything. The money, the promotion, the baby, she stops, horror dawning on her face. The baby? Richard's voice could freeze hell. The position we just promoted you to is meant for someone who's taking maternity leave? Jake's mask finally cracks. I can explain. Like you explained the missing nursery furniture? I ask quietly. Or my grandmother's jewelry. Or the trust fund you drained. You bitch, he lunges toward me, but security's already moving. I wouldn't, Helen says coldly. Assaulting a pregnant woman in front of witnesses? Even your lawyer couldn't spin that. The boardroom erupts into chaos. Maya's sobbing, security's restraining Jake, board members are shouting. Through it all, I remain standing, one hand on my stomach, watching my husband's carefully constructed world implode. This isn't over, Jake spits as security escorts him out. Actually, it is. Richard turns to Maya. Miss Thompson, please stay. We need to discuss your position. Everyone else, clear the room. As people file out, I catch Jake's eye one last time. The hatred there would have broken me once. Now it feels like vindication. Nova, Maya calls suddenly. I'm sorry. I didn't know. About the jewelry, the nursery. He said you didn't want them. I touch my grandmother's ring on her finger. Keep it. Consider it a reminder of what happens when you build your happiness on someone else's pain. Outside, Helen squeezes my hand. You did it. We did it, I correct. But it's not over yet. No, she agrees. The criminal charges are next. Then the divorce. I watch through the glass as Maya crumbles under Richard's questioning while security escorts Jake from the building. His perfect life, dismantled in under an hour. The baby kicks, stronger than ever. For the first time in months, I smile. Let's go home, I tell Helen. The real home, not the one he destroyed. As we leave, I delete Jake's number from my phone. Some things don't need an encore performance. The envelope arrives on the same day my son does. I'm still in the delivery room, Helen holding my hand, when the nurse brings in the registered letter along with the birth certificate forms. Mrs. Adams, she says, a courier insisted this was urgent. The return address shows Jake's lawyer's firm. My hands shake as I open it, but not from fear, not anymore. Inside is a single sheet of paper and a key. The letter is handwritten, Jake's precise script now unsteady. I found this in my father's study. Maybe now I understand why he left. The key belongs to a safety deposit box. Helen's eyes widen in recognition. That's your grandmother's key, she whispers. The one Jake claimed he lost. My son stirs in his bassinet, and something clicks into place. Can you check what's in it? Helen returns an hour later, holding a familiar velvet box. Inside, my grandmother's jewelry collection gleams, every piece Jake claimed he'd sold. There's more, Helen says, placing a worn journal beside me. Your grandmother's diary. Jake's father. He tried to steal these 2 years ago. That's why he disappeared. The baby fusses, and I lift him, studying his tiny features. He has Jake's eyes, but they're softer somehow. Kinder. He was trying to tell me something, I realize. About patterns. About fathers and sons. Helen takes the diary. Should I read it? No. I touch my son's cheek. Some cycles need to end. The nurse returns with the birth certificate forms. Have you chosen a name? I look at my son, at the jewelry that represents generations of strong women, at Helen who helped me break free. James, I say finally. But not after his father. After my grandmother, Jamie. Helen's breath catches. Nova. He'll know where he comes from, I say firmly. But he'll write his own story. A commotion outside interrupts us. Jake's voice carries through the door. I have a right to see my son. Security arrives before he reaches us, but not before I glimpse his face through the window, haunted, desperate. For a moment, I see his father in him, the same pattern playing out again. Should I call the police? Helen asks. I look down at James, peaceful despite the chaos. No, let him go. After everything he did? That's why. I adjust James's blanket. I won't let anger shape my son's world the way it shaped Jake's. Later, when the hospital quiets, I read Jake's letter again. Between the lines, I see a different story, not just of betrayal and revenge, but of broken men trying to outrun their father's shadows. Helen helps me pack the jewelry away, but I keep one piece out, a simple silver locket. Inside, I place a tiny photo of James next to the faded picture of my grandmother. What will you tell him? Helen asks. About Jake. The truth, I say. That his father lost his way. That patterns can be broken. That he's free to be better. A nurse brings in release papers and a second letter. This one from Maya. I set it aside, unopened. Some chapters don't need an ending. James stirs, reaching up with perfect tiny fingers. I let him grasp my thumb, marveling at his strength, his possibility. Ready to go home? Helen asks. Home. Not the house Jake and I shared, but my parents' beach cottage where the air smells of salt and new beginnings. Yes, I say, and mean it. I tuck Jake's letter into the diary, a reminder not of what I lost, but what I refused to become. The revenge I thought I wanted has transformed into something else, not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. James sleeps against my chest as we leave, his heart beating its own rhythm, writing its own story. In the end, that's the greatest revenge of all, not destruction, but creation. Not continuing the cycle, but breaking free. We step into the sunlight, my son and I, leaving the shadows behind.
Welcome, my little slave. Despite knowing that I was here to formally introduce myself for marriage, this was the first thing she said. What? I thought I must have heard wrong and let out a confused voice. The mother-in-law giggled as she looked at me. Oh, weren't you a slave after all? With such a poor-looking face. And David, whom I thought was on my side, betrayed me terribly. Glancing at my face, David burst out laughing. It looks poor, right? I'd love to see what your parents look like. That's right. Well, coming to a wealthy family like ours, I wonder if your parents would faint. The mother-in-law and David continued to look down on me. I couldn't stand being looked down upon even by my parents. While they weren't looking, I secretly sent a message to my father. He replied immediately. I'm on my way there right now. I'm going to get some fresh air outside. I couldn't bear to hear any more insults from David and his family. Don't you run away now. David's vulgar laughter echoed. I left the seat too and waited for my father to arrive. 10 minutes later. I brought my father to meet David and the others. I am the father of the slave. My father spoke calmly, but his eyes were not smiling at all. What? The mother-in-law, who should know my father's face, stiffened her face greatly. I am Kelly Smith. I turned 30 this year. I work as an office worker at a small company called Foster Machinery, and I have lived as inconspicuously as possible. That's why I only wear foundation for my usual makeup. I prefer to wear navy or black clothing. I don't wear contacts, and my glasses are thick and have a high prescription. The reason I go to such lengths is that my father has a high-profile job, and I have been influenced by it since I was young. My father is an actor. He used to be popular, and apparently, he was surrounded by women when he walked down the street. He often appears on TV in supporting roles and is moderately well known. I had a tough time because of my father until middle school. Classmates would ask for my father's autograph, and their parents would say, "Let us meet him." I refused all those requests, and as a result, I was often criticized by others. I was probably thought to be unfairly privileged. I was also harassed by envious classmates. I didn't want to cause any trouble for my beloved father. I hated the thought of being seen as arrogant. After much thought, I made a thorough effort to dress plainly and went to a high school where I knew no one. Fortunately, Smith is a common surname, so I was able to live normally from high school. And perhaps because I look plain, men don't approach me. That allowed me to have a comfortable student life. I loved talking about manga with my female friends, and those were probably the happiest times. I met my fiancé David after becoming a working adult. David works for the leasing company that provides copiers to the company I work for. David and I had little direct interaction. David would come regularly to check on the copier, and we would exchange a few words then. Our relationship changed dramatically when the copier broke down one day. That day, I was busy preparing materials for a meeting to be held the next morning. However, the copier stopped working in the middle of this. I was greatly troubled. If this continued, I wouldn't be able to prepare the materials for tomorrow's meeting. So I hurriedly called David. David came quickly and checked the copier. "Can you fix it?" When I asked David anxiously, he responded with a smile. "No worries. I'll take care of it." I fell in love with David's smile in an instant. The rest is history. In the end, the copier wasn't fixed, but David arranged for a replacement. The materials were prepared in time for the meeting. I, who had fallen in love with David, made every effort to appeal to him. I asked for his contact information and called him frequently. Then I confessed to David, and we started dating. David was always very kind even after we started dating. He was always considerate, and I had never seen him angry. I thought that even if he knew my father's real identity, he would still treat me kindly. With that in mind, after dating for 3 months, I bravely proposed to David. He accepted joyfully. I remember being very happy. However, there was one thing that concerned me. It was about my appearance. I had always worn thick glasses. I always dressed plainly, even on dates. It was a long-standing habit. Actually, I looked just like my father. I have distinct facial features. Because of my appearance, I was envied by girls in middle school. Boys also judged me by my looks, and I had some tough times. But with David, I was sure it would be okay. From now on, I thought, I would gradually change my appearance for David's sake. That's what I thought. However, after getting engaged to David, I started to feel some discomfort. Before getting engaged, David seemed like a kind person, but recently he has started making remarks that look down on me. The other day, we went to a bridal fair to decide on a wedding venue because David had suggested it. The place David took me to was a dazzling world. It was a luxurious guest house, perfect for a large-scale wedding with over 100 guests. Seeing that scene, I was perplexed. I don't have many friends from my school days. Plus, I didn't want to stand out, so I had hoped for a small venue with only a ceremony. I really wanted to go home right away. However, David was having fun and I couldn't bring it up. So, I endured and passed the time. After it was over, we stopped at a cafe. David was in a very good mood. That wedding venue we just saw was nice, wasn't it? I would prefer an even flashier ceremony though. While drinking coffee, David spoke. If things continued this way, we would end up choosing that wedding venue. In a panic, I decided to discuss my preference with David. I think a wedding with just the two of us might be nice. I don't like standing out too much. I had thought the kind David would surely compromise. However, the reality was completely different. David looked at me and snickered. Indeed, a plain Jane like Kelly wouldn't suit a wedding like the one we just saw. Is there even a dress that would suit those thick glasses of yours? What? I was bewildered by David's comment. But a wedding is a matter between families, right? My family is wealthy. We need to have a decent wedding to maintain our dignity. I was speechless. The previously kind David had started looking down on me as if he had changed. I was terribly shocked by David's attitude. And to my bewildered self, David made an even worse comment. Kelly should just stay quiet and do as I say. You should be grateful to even get married, being such a plain Jane. Suddenly, David's face turned serious, and he made that comment. I was bewildered by his words. I even felt scared by David's serious expression. Then, the next moment, David smiled and said, I'll decide everything for you. Kelly, you just need to say yes and do as I tell you. Yes. I didn't know how to respond and laughed awkwardly. Maybe getting engaged to David was a mistake. But it's too late to pretend it never happened. I have already reported our engagement to the company and our parents. Moreover, I still liked David even after all that had been done to me. He might return to the kind David I knew before the engagement. That's why, despite being puzzled by David's change, I had no choice but to continue with the engagement. David kept making remarks that troubled me. Each time, my heart was hurt. But I couldn't come to dislike David. Even though I thought about breaking up with him, the kind David I knew kept flashing in my mind. I still loved David. I continued the engagement relationship while being puzzled by David's change. Then one day, something happened that made me even more bewildered. It was the day David and I went to the wedding venue to handle the paperwork. After visiting several wedding venues, David decided on the first luxurious guest house we saw. Eagerly, David said, After all, a grand ceremony suits me. Of course, it's mismatched for Kelly. David laughed heartily, hurting me. And so, for the paperwork, David and I went to that guest house. On the way there, I encountered a person. Isn't that David? Mom? What are you doing here? David was surprised and looked at the woman. Then, David introduced her to me. Kelly, this is my mom. Mom, this is Kelly Smith, my fiancé. Remember I told you I was getting married? The mother-in-law smiled and greeted me. I'm David's mother. You seem like a serious young lady. Where do you work? Surely it must be at a major company? It was my first meeting with David's mother. I answered nervously. I work in administration at Foster Machinery. Then, the mother-in-law looked puzzled. Foster Machinery. I haven't heard of it. Then, David joined in our conversation. Foster Machinery is one of my sales destinations. It's a small company with about 30 employees, so it's natural you don't know it, Mom. Upon hearing David's explanation, the mother-in-law frowned. I thought since you were David's fiancé, you'd work at a more reputable company. Isn't the salary there rather low? Are you planning to make David suffer? I'm sorry. Indeed, the salary at my current company isn't very high. So all I could do was apologize to the mother-in-law. Then, the mother-in-law sighed heavily and said, Anyway, can you stop relying on David like a child? We come from a distinguished lineage. We don't need a woman from an unknown background. Ah. I responded to the mother-in-law's comment with a bewildered reply, but the mother-in-law continued to heat up. First of all, what about your parents? They work at a decent company, right? The mother-in-law glared at me and interrogated me. Well, my father is. As I tried to answer the mother-in-law's question with confusion, my eyes were drawn to her bag because there was something familiar in it. Seeing me silent, David spoke up. Mom, calm down a bit. We'll go and formally introduce Kelly for marriage soon. I see. I won't be very welcoming though. The mother-in-law looked at me with a displeased face, and it seemed my first impression was the worst for her. The path to marriage seemed too difficult, and I secretly sighed. Then came the day of the formal marriage introduction. Wow. In front of David's family home, I muttered in surprise. The scene before me far exceeded my expectations. Since the mother-in-law had mentioned they were from a distinguished family lineage, I had expected David's home to be wealthy. However, the scene before me was more amazing than I expected. The gate was automatic, and there was an elevator inside. Additionally, there were 10 luxury cars outside. They were all foreign cars, probably a hobby of the father-in-law. David started talking to me. My dad isn't here today because of work. It's just Mom, so just relax as usual. David said this with a smile, but my face tightened even more. The mother-in-law had been harsh to me before. Surely she would make some snide remark today too. Then, David and I entered the living room where the mother-in-law was waiting. Hello. About the other day. I said that to the mother-in-law. Then, the next moment, she said something outrageous. Welcome, my little slave. Even though she should have known I was here for a marriage introduction, this was the first thing she said. What? I thought I must have misheard and let out a confused voice. The mother-in-law chuckled as she looked at me. Oh. Weren't you a slave? You have such a poor-looking face. I just wanted someone I could use for free. A slave. How could she say such a terrible thing? Then the mother-in-law laughed as if she was having fun. David told me. He said it's okay to treat you like a slave. It seems like David just wanted to marry someone who would obey him completely. Sorry for you. David, what do you mean? I asked David, turning pale. It must be a poor joke. I wanted to believe that. And David, whom I thought was on my side, betrayed me terribly. Glancing at my face, David burst out laughing. Poor face, right? I'd love to see what your parents look like. They probably have plain faces too. Maybe we could use them as well, right? David said this and laughed loudly. Indeed, having someone obedient for free is appealing. But coming to a wealthy family like ours, I wonder if your parents would faint. The mother-in-law and David continued to look down on me. Then, the mother-in-law asked with a smirk. By the way, what does your father do? He's not homeless, is he? Such a thing. Then David burst out laughing and replied to the mother-in-law. Mom, that's not a job. It's obvious from Kelly that he doesn't have a stable job. Ah, I'm laughing so much it hurts. David and the mother-in-law continued to look down on my parents. They assumed they had low education and plain looks. Frustrated, I clenched my teeth and listened to their remarks. The mother-in-law and David were too disrespectful. I couldn't stand being looked down upon even by my parents. While they weren't looking, I quietly sent a message to my father. I need you here right now. I sent this message along with a map of David's family home that David had sent me for today's marriage introduction. I knew my father had the day off from work today. He was probably relaxing at home by now. Fortunately, my father replied within a minute. I'm on my way. Relieved by my father's response, I spoke to David and the mother-in-law. I'm feeling unwell, so I'm going to get some fresh air outside. I couldn't bear to hear any more insults from David and his family. I thought I would wait quietly outside until my father arrived. Oh really? Then David, let's relax and continue our coffee. The mother-in-law was pleased to be alone with David. Kelly, don't you dare run away. David's vulgar laughter echoed. I left the room and waited outside for my father's arrival. 10 minutes later. My father, wearing dark sunglasses, appeared. Kelly, what's going on? You were supposed to be introducing your fiancé's family today, right? I was surprised when you suddenly called. My father asked me with a puzzled face. Dad. I'm just so frustrated. Seeing my father's face, I felt relieved and started to cry. I tried to hold back, but the tears kept coming. What's wrong, Kelly? Seeing me cry, my father began to panic. I explained everything that had happened to my father. Since getting engaged, David's attitude had changed. I also told him about how the mother-in-law had joined David in looking down on me. I can't forgive them for looking down on you without knowing anything. Even as I explained, my tears didn't stop. My father listened to me in silence. However, it seemed like he was quietly angry. Then I told my father something about the mother-in-law. At that moment, my father smirked. He took off his sunglasses and handed them to me. We're going inside now. I'll make sure they regret hurting Kelly. I made a decision at my father's words. My love for David had cooled. All that was left was a desire for revenge. I've made up my mind too. We'll make David and the others regret this. After doing something, I put on my father's sunglasses. Then, together with my father, I entered David's family home. I stood before David and the others, leading my father. Sorry to keep you waiting. Standing resolute with my father, I, wearing sunglasses, left David speechless. Why are you suddenly wearing sunglasses? He muttered while looking at me. The mother-in-law initially smirked at me, but upon seeing my father next to me, she was stunned. I realized how people can freeze in shock. The mother-in-law must have been planning to say something awful again when I returned. But too bad. I won't let things go her way. Instead, I plan to push her into the abyss. She must already know who my father is. Then my father spoke to the mother-in-law. I am the father of the slave. His voice was calm, but his eyes were not smiling. His handsome face only added to his sternness. What? The mother-in-law, who likely knew my father's face, dramatically stiffened her expression. Why? Why is Mr. John Smith here? No, could this be some kind of prank? While shaking, the mother-in-law spoke. Her cheeks were a bit red. There seemed to be an excited atmosphere around her. And her eyes sparkled like those of a young girl. David, not understanding well, remained dumbfounded. My father did not answer her questions and just stared sternly at David and the mother-in-law. The mother-in-law, making eye contact with my father, blushed. It was unbecoming of a woman her age. I watched the mother-in-law with cold eyes. Then, a bewildered David finally asked, "Mr. John Smith? Do you know him, Mom?" "This person. David probably doesn't know about my father. I think he's quite well known among the mother's generation. But younger people might not know unless they watch dramas." Then the mother-in-law glared sharply at David. "David. What an impolite thing to say. This gentleman is Mr. John Smith. A great actor and my first love." "What?" David seemed incredulous. Then the mother-in-law turned towards my father with a smile and spoke. "I'm a huge fan of you. Look, this too." She hurriedly grabbed her bag and showed it to my father. "It's a keychain available only to fan club members. I've been a fan of you for 20 years. The mother-in-law began to assert her status as a huge fan of my father. "Mom." David was somewhat disgusted by the mother-in-law's sudden change. The mother-in-law continued to talk to my father. She must have been very excited to have her favorite actor in front of her. However, my father's gaze on the mother-in-law was very stern. And after being silent until then, my father finally spoke. "I understand that you're a fan of mine. However, you tried to treat my beloved daughter Kelly like a slave, didn't you?" "What?" The mother-in-law's high spirits suddenly turned to dismay. She froze, visibly trembling. Ignoring the mother-in-law, my father continued. "And you dared to treat me as a homeless person without even meeting me? That's quite disrespectful." Saying that, my father glared at the mother-in-law. Then she began to panic. "No. I didn't know that Miss Kelly's father was Mr. John Smith. I'd be thrilled to have you as a family." "Right, David?" "Yeah." David seemed to be pushed by the mother-in-law. And the mother-in-law tried to justify herself to my father. I was disgusted listening to her. Until my father arrived, the mother-in-law had been looking down on both me and my father. Seeing my father, she changed so quickly. I only felt distrust. "If I look closely, Kelly does resemble you, such a wonderful lady." The earlier comments were just because I was jealous of losing my son. "If I had known about you, I would have treated you more respectfully." The mother-in-law continued to desperately pretend. My father looked at her with annoyance. Watching their exchange, I thought to myself, I can't keep troubling my father like this. Besides, this is my issue. I should clearly express this to the mother-in-law myself. So I told her, "I am breaking off my engagement with David. There will never be any family ties between my father and your family. No. Kelly, it was my fault. You're missing the chance to become family with Mr. John Smith. Please reconsider." The mother-in-law, with a tearful face, tried to persuade me. She had been terrible to me up until now. Even her tearful face couldn't be trusted. I looked at her with cold eyes. However, seeing me silent, the mother-in-law thought she could persuade me. She smiled sweetly at me. "You want to marry David, don't you? I won't oppose it anymore, it's okay. I will do anything you say for your sake." The mother-in-law, desperate to become family with my father, clung to me. Her readiness to do anything was the complete opposite of her initial stance. I even despised how quickly the mother-in-law changed her opinions. I muttered softly, "No, I don't want to." "Excuse me? What did you say?" Not sure if she had heard me, the mother-in-law tilted her head. So I shouted louder this time. "I absolutely do not want to become family with you." "What?" The mother-in-law was baffled by my shout. I poured out my feelings to her. "As soon as you heard where I work, you made derogatory comments, right? And you spoke terribly about my father. I will never forgive that," I firmly told the mother-in-law. "What?" Thinking it futile to persuade me further, the mother-in-law looked at my father. Then, smiling, she spoke to him. Kelly says this, but you want your daughter to be happy, right? Our family has a lot of money, and surely she will be happy with us. Certainly, some people might think money equals happiness. However, I am different. Perhaps understanding my feelings, my father countered her words. Kelly values love more than money. Besides, we have money. I make a decent amount from acting. The mother-in-law was at a loss for words. It's understandable. After all, my father is a well-known actor who appears frequently on dramas. He earns a lot and isn't short on money. Coming from a wealthy home, there are no benefits for me to marry just for money. The mother-in-law realized this and fell silent. She probably couldn't think of a good way out. Watching the silent mother-in-law, my father continued. You say you are a fan of mine, but I detest people who disparage my dear daughter. Could you please stop calling yourself a fan? With that, my father glared at the mother-in-law. Then, tears started to roll down the mother-in-law's cheeks. If you hate me, I can't go on living. The mother-in-law said this, breaking down in tears. David, who had been silent until now, started to speak. If you stay quiet, you can say whatever you want, huh? Kelly, you'll regret breaking off our engagement. No one else will bother with a plain Jane like you. David smirked as he spoke. David, stop it. In front of my father, the mother-in-law tried to stop David. But David didn't hold back. I chose a plain Jane like you because I thought you'd obey me. I was planning to cheat with cute girls once we were married. This really pisses me off. David rambled on about things I didn't even ask to hear. Listening to David's words, I thought calmly. There was never any love from David. He just wanted a marriage with a woman who would obey him. My affection for David had long since cooled. As I was thinking about this, David continued his selfish remarks. You. My father gritted his teeth, looking like he was about to grab David. It seemed like a good time for me to fight back. Dad, wait. So I stopped my father. I remained wearing my sunglasses, and I let out a slight smile. What now? David seemed taken aback by my confident smile. Do I still look plain? I swiftly took off the sunglasses I had been wearing. What? David stared at my face, frozen in place. It made sense. With the sunglasses off, I was fully made up. Normally, I only wore foundation. But now, I had done my eyeshadow, mascara, and eyeliner. After meeting my father and crying, I had quickly done my makeup. Just eye makeup, but I think it really changed my appearance. Is that really you, Kelly? David's face turns a bit red. He must be mesmerized by how the makeup enhances my features. Yes, it's definitely me. Until now, I didn't want to stand out, so I intentionally made myself look plain. But I've decided to stop hiding myself. Until now, it was because of my father that I unintentionally stood out. That's why I wanted to remain inconspicuous. However, because of that, both David and the mother-in-law spoke ill of my father. If they're going to badmouth my father, I might as well stand out a bit and be myself. That's what I thought. David, with a flushed face, says, if you had been like this from the start, I would have been nicer to you. I would reconsider everything with you if you looked like this with makeup. Let's cancel the engagement breakup right now. And while you're at it, introduce me to some beautiful actresses through your father. Who would cancel the engagement now? And asking for actresses is too presumptuous. I firmly told David. The engagement is off for good. I don't need you, David. I'll also cancel the wedding venue. What? David is stunned. However, I'm not going to let him off that easily. I press him further. Of course, you'll be responsible for the cancellation fee for the wedding venue. That's only fair, right? The mother-in-law cries out in confusion. Wait a minute. It's too much to ask him to pay the whole amount. David also looks bewildered and is unable to argue. Then, my father chimes in. Why not have David's father pay for it? With all those luxury cars he owns, it should be easy for him. My father says this with a pleasant smile. Here, I play my strongest card. If you're not satisfied, we can take this to court? But remember, my father is a famous actor. If the news gets out about this, he might be attacked by his extreme fans. My father has many fervent fans. A critic who once called my father a poor actor faced terrible consequences. Harassing phone calls and letters with knives in them, the extent of the harassment was unimaginable. It was even in the news for a while. Remembering that incident, the mother-in-law's face turns pale. She frantically tries to persuade David. David, you should bear the entire cancellation fee. You don't know what might happen. From the look on the mother-in-law's face, it seems David understands the gravity of the situation. Huh? No way. David's face turns desperate, and he collapses to his knees. I don't need David in my life. Dad, let's go home. I ignore David and the mother-in-law, who are slumped down, and leave with my father. My engagement with David is conclusively broken off. And David ends up being responsible for the full amount of the cancellation fee for the wedding venue. In fact, David's father is the CEO of a major corporation, and my father once appeared in commercials for his company. Because of that connection, my father informed David's father about David and the mother-in-law's behavior. Naturally, David's father was furious. He severely reprimanded David and the mother-in-law. Then, he pressured David to take on the full amount of the cancellation fee. As a result, David had to shoulder millions. The fallout affected the mother-in-law as well. This time, she was faced with divorce from David's father. It wasn't just because of how they treated us. Apparently, the mother-in-law was notorious for her lavish spending. She had spent a significant amount following my father, a famous actor. That funding came from David's father's money. David's father had apparently run out of patience with her. Additionally, my father revealed that the mother-in-law had sent him quite risky love letters. I want to divorce and be with Mr. John Smith. My current partner is just a source of money. She had written such content in love letters to my father. David's father was furious about this. Despite the mother-in-law's resistance, they proceeded to divorce through lawyers. The mother-in-law lamented. This isn't how it was supposed to be. And lived in tears, I heard through the grapevine. She was also forced to leave my father's fan club. Her troublesome stalking behavior was too much to handle. It's hard to imagine happiness visiting the mother-in-law now. She brought it upon herself. Half a year has passed. And then, David was arrested. The reason was his stalking behavior towards me. He couldn't forget me after I took off my sunglasses that day. David started appearing frequently in front of me. Even after I quit my job, he would wait outside my house. He also called often. Please, agree to get engaged again. I can't manage without you. David pleaded over the phone, crying, but in the end, he was only looking at my face. It was very different before and after I showed my makeup. I don't need a man who judges only by looks. I politely refused and blocked his calls. However, David's behavior only escalated. I consulted the police several times. At times, I felt threatened by him. After much deliberation, I filed a complaint with the police. My father supported this decision. Eventually, David was arrested for forcibly entering my house. And with his arrest, he was apparently fired from his job. Now, all that's left for David is several tens of thousands in debt. It's unlikely that David will be able to lead a decent life from now on. That's the punishment for looking down on people. What goes around, comes around. Since then, I've been working as my father's manager. This job is different from my previous office work, it's more challenging. I manage my father's schedule and accompany him to venues to make greetings. I even handle salary negotiations. Previously, as an office worker, I mostly commuted between home and the office. I I rarely spoke to people at work and spent most of my time facing a computer. Now, meeting and talking to people has become a main part of my job, a big change from before. Yet, I find this new role incredibly enjoyable. Being a manager is a glamorous job, but it's more than that. It's a behind-the-scenes job that allows my father to focus on acting. The hours are irregular, and it requires adaptability. More than anything, it's a job that allows me to support my father up close. After causing so much worry in the past, I want to properly repay him. It's a job I've just started. Many challenges will likely arise. But I want to persevere and keep looking forward. I continue to work hard every day by my beloved father's side.
Dare you defy me, even though you're just a daughter-in-law?
As my father-in-law's angry voice echoed, something cold was poured over my head. It took me a moment to realize that it was wine.
Really, such a useless daughter-in-law. I wish you would just leave.
Far from calming her husband, my mother-in-law sneered instead. And then a shocking truth was revealed to me. My name is Jessica. I am a 35-year-old company employee, and my tall stature is a complex for a woman. Additionally, I have a high educational background which allowed me to secure a job at a major foreign company, hence, I have a substantial income. I think to myself that, were I a man, I could boast about these high specs. In fact, my husband Ben often remarks,
You were born the wrong gender, huh?
Ben often insists that I have pulled the role of the main provider, probably because I damage his pride as a man. Having a high income is not a fault, rather it's something good. If my husband doesn't think well of me, then perhaps it is an unnecessary burden for a woman. Our living expenses are deposited into a bank account under Ben's name at his request. I deposit my salary into that account. We use the funds in that account for everyday shopping, and even the utility bills and credit card payments are under my husband's name. This arrangement seems to be his way of maintaining the appearance of being the main provider. However, the mortgage payments are under my name because of the large amount, just in case something happens. Well, that's a minor issue, and I don't think there's a particular problem with Ben regarding this. What concerns me more is my relationship with my in-laws. From the beginning of our marriage, I've had a difficulty relationship with them. When we first met, they mocked me for my height, saying I was not feminine. Moreover, when they learned that I graduated from a far better university than Ben, they were hesitant about the marriage itself.
A woman with education is a haughty woman who doesn't know how to support her man.
It was completely biased, and I found it truly rude as an attitude to take at a first meeting. Eventually, Ben persuaded them, and while they stopped opposing the marriage, they still looked down on me. Still, since they are Ben's parents who raised him, I want to get along well and avoid causing trouble. However, there was another issue with my in-laws. They were exceedingly extravagant with money. They had long since spent their retirement funds, had no savings, and their pension was far from enough to cover their expenses. To top it off, when they were in the red, they asked Ben for money instead of refusing. Furthermore, instead of refusing, Ben suggested that he wanted to send them money every month. But Ben, you don't really have that much spare money, do you? I blurted out, and Ben frowned.
That's true, but I think it's better than being asked for money from strange places.
There was some truth in that. If the financially irresponsible in-laws were tempted by users, they might demand far more money from us than just the remittances. So in the end, I ended up contributing the money. I deposited more money than usual into the account we always use for living expenses and transferred it from there to my in-laws' account. I don't mind contributing the money if it's an amount I can afford. However, I want those two to clearly understand that I am the one providing the money. I asked Ben this because I hoped it might lead to a more decent treatment of me by my in-laws. This time, Ben consulted me without shouldering it alone. In other words, setting aside his complexes and pride, he relied on me. Likewise, if my in-laws, who usually look down on me as a man-like, realize there's a benefit, they might reconsider and see me as a dependable person. After all, it's because of my high education and income that I can make the remittances. If they understood that, they wouldn't be able to complain about me being presumptuous or whatever anymore. Thus, I harbored hopes for our future relationship while also contributing to my in-laws' remittances. However, contrary to my expectations, their attitude remained unchanged.
It's so sad that Ben has to be with such an unpleasant education bragging woman.
When I went to my in-laws' house, the snide comments continued as usual. I was spending as much as $3,000 every month for their living expenses, and they were completely dependent on me, yet I never heard a word of thanks from them. Usually they say I'm bragging about my education, but I only mentioned my education during my introduction. Other than that, I never brought up my education on my own.
No matter which university you graduated from, it's useless once you're in society. That's all you have to boast about, isn't it?
Such comments are indeed irritating. As far as I'm concerned, my educational background is the result of my efforts during my student days. It's not true that it's useless in society. I got my current job by utilizing what I learned at school. I tried to respond modestly, despite the buildup of frustrations I had. And because of that, my income is stable, so Ben doesn't have to bear the burden. And about the remittance. However, while I was speaking, my father-in-law interrupted me grumpily.
Instead of being grateful to your husband, you have to make everything about your doing. That's why I dislike mannish women.
Facing such attitudes, I realized that saying more could lead to a serious argument. Thinking this, I closed my mouth, and Ben seemed concerned as well. When we got home, he immediately apologized for his parents' behavior.
As promised, the remittance is coming from your money, and I've explained that to them.
Ben looked apologetic, and I returned a wry smile. It's not your fault, so don't worry. To my in-laws, even the fact that the wife was making the remittance might seem presumptuous. Surely they must understand that they are benefiting from this. But feelings are feelings, I suppose. Maybe emotions just can't be changed. Thinking that we might never understand each other for the rest of our lives, I felt a little sad. Within 6 months, I was summoned to my in-laws' house for a family gathering. Ben's family is large, and preparing meals for such gatherings is always a struggle. Yet cleaning the entire house and cooking massive amounts of food always falls to me.
Hurry up and work. Don't think you, a daughter-in-law, get to rest.
Without wringing a rag or washing a potato, my mother-in-law just sat there giving me orders. It's always like this when relatives gather, but this time I had been working overtime until the day before. By the time the relatives gathered, I was completely exhausted. While eating dinner, I was thinking about finally sitting down, but I couldn't relax for even 10 minutes.
Hey, you, come here and pour the drinks.
I was called over by my father-in-law before I had even finished eating half of my meal. His face was red, clearly drunk already. My father-in-law, who hadn't helped prepare for the banquet at all, was just eating and drinking as he pleased. Unlike the carefree father-in-law, I was exhausted from working nonstop and really just wanted to lie down right then. Moreover, I hadn't had a proper lunch, so I was at my limit. That's why I responded with both my body and spirit utterly drained. Please, wait a moment. I've just started eating. Can you wait until I've finished my plate? In the next moment, my father-in-law's angry voice boomed.
How dare you defy me, just a daughter-in-law?
I heard his rough footsteps approaching, but I didn't have the luxury of looking up for my meal. Since I was already being assigned tasks while eating, I hurried to finish my meal, preparing to be yelled at from close range by my father-in-law. However, before I could even look back to see what was wrong, something cold was suddenly poured over my head. What? For a moment I was stunned, but then I quickly noticed the wine bottle in my father-in-law's hand, and from the liquid dripping down from my hair, I recognized the distinctive smell. It was definitely wine that had been poured over me. I was astounded by this unexpected turn of events, and then I heard my mother-in-law's sneering voice.
What a fitting sight for a useless daughter-in-law.
Instead of reprimanding her husband, my mother-in-law seemed rather pleased and continued.
Oh, what's with that look? I've heard that wine contains good ingredients for the hair. Maybe this will boost your feminine charm a bit.
It seemed she no longer bothered to hide her disdainful attitude towards me, even in front of the relatives.
It's because you never obey your husband's parents, even though you married into our family. You brought this on yourself. Clean this up.
After saying this, my father-in-law left the empty bottle by my side and returned to his seat.
Really, what a useless daughter-in-law. I wish you would just leave.
At that moment, something snapped inside me. As the wine cooled my hair and shoulders, my insides boiled with rage. You always say I'm useless, but then please stop depending on me for living expenses. Determined to say everything on my mind today, no matter how hostile the atmosphere, I glared at my in-laws. However, they just laughed off what I was saying.
When have we ever relied on someone like you? Ben helps us out with a monthly allowance of $3,000. You don't do anything, do you?
Hearing this, I was momentarily speechless, unable to grasp the meaning of their words.
That's right. You have nothing to offer but your education. Just a useless wife leeching off her husband. Don't take credit for what your husband does.
It took me a few seconds to realize they didn't know who was actually providing the money. Ben, what do you mean? I thought you explained that the money for the allowance comes from me. I turned to my husband, who was sitting silently next to me, and he awkwardly looked away. That's when I finally understood. Ben had lied. He hadn't told his parents that the money was coming from me. It was natural that their attitude was still bad. Ben had been claiming the allowance as his own achievement. As I looked down, drops fell from my wet hair. Though Ben had some pride, I hadn't expected him to lie. He knew how his parents were treating me. Ignoring the reason I had asked him to tell his parents, how could he not have imagined this? If Ben had properly conveyed this, I wouldn't have suffered like this today. Realizing that the husband I trusted had actually betrayed me, I was too shocked to look up. My in-laws continued to berate me as usual. The relatives were perplexed, but those two didn't care about anyone's gaze anymore. As I listened to the barrage of insults with my head down, questions began to arise. Why did I have to put up with all this chaos? Had Ben ever really stood up for me before? Why was it always me? As these thoughts circled in my mind, the words just came out. Then I'll stop the allowance and leave. Those words resonated deeply within me. Yes, I'll leave. There's no reason to deal with these people anymore. Feeling strangely liberated, I left my in-laws' house, ignoring the shocked expressions of my in-laws. The call from Ben came the next day. I had left my in-laws' house with only my essentials and important belongings from our home. I also left the divorce papers. Ben must have been surprised when he came home and found them.
Where are you? You don't even have a home to return to.
I don't have parents to go back to, so going back home isn't an option for me. That's why Ben never imagined that I could actually leave. Me? I'm at an internet cafe right now, gathering real estate information. Ben raised his voice in response.
For what purpose?
Well, you saw the divorce papers I left, didn't you? If we're getting a divorce, I need to find a new place to live. My matter-of-fact tone seemed to shock Ben, and he fell silent for a while. Finally, he spoke in a strained voice.
I want to talk in person.
Accepting Ben's request, I paused my search and decided to return home for a while. When I arrived, Ben was waiting with a stern look on his face.
Are you serious about getting a divorce?
I nodded silently, and Ben looked displeased.
It wasn't me who threw the drink on you.
You think that was the only issue? Have you ever acted appropriately towards me during our entire marriage? Despite being my husband, Ben had never protected me from his parents. If a spouse sees their parents mistreating their partner, they would usually defend them or intervene. But you didn't, did you? Throughout our marriage, Ben had me contribute financially while resenting that I earned more. Now I understand. I felt unnecessary for having a high income because my own husband devalued me. Moreover, you squandered every chance to improve our situation for the sake of your own pride. You acted as if what happened to me didn't concern you, right? If he had handled things properly, I wouldn't have had to struggle unnecessarily. If he hadn't lied about the money, his parents might not have treated me so badly. Even the incident with the wine yesterday was ultimately because of Ben.
But, that's not a big deal. You know the term support from behind? Traditionally, it's the woman's role to keep the home, but since you earn, you should support me with your financial power.
However, Ben pursed his lips and continued to complain. I wouldn't mind taking on more of the household expenses or even the allowances if you had treated me fairly, but that's not the case. I glared at Ben sharply. I supported us in the ways I could, but you disregarded that and continually worsened my situation. That's why I've had enough. Ben still wore a dissatisfied expression, as if unwilling to admit any wrongdoing, resembling a child scolded for mischief. Remember how you always said, stand by your husband? Does that mean I should stay silent even when you take credit for my contributions? The issue of the allowance was indeed a case of Ben taking credit. I confronted him about this, and Ben, perhaps feeling cornered, suddenly shouted,
Enough! Fine, I get it. It's all my fault, you say. If that's what you want, I'll give you your divorce.
With that, he grabbed the untouched divorce papers, slammed them down on his desk, and hastily signed them.
There, happy now?
He smirked as he pushed the signed papers towards me.
I'd love to see how long you can survive on your own. You who have nothing but your education and rely on me for everything.
For a moment, I was stunned by Ben's mocking words. I don't recall relying on you that much. We split the household chores fairly, and I contribute more to our expenses. Ben frowned and retorted.
What? You're talking nonsense. All the living expenses come out of my account. Despite your earnings, you're stingy. You could have just silently given up the money for my parents' allowance.
It seemed he was under some misunderstanding, likely because all the withdrawals were set up through his account. He had apparently forgotten who was actually making the deposits. If left alone about the allowances, Ben might have eventually started to believe his own lies about his parents' situation as the truth. Well, it doesn't matter. Once I stop depositing, you'll see the reality soon enough. Here, take this. I handed him the papers I had printed at the internet cafe. Ben didn't take them.
What's this? If you want to leave so badly, go ahead. Where you live after this has nothing to do with me.
Ben glanced briefly at the papers, noting they were all for small one-room apartments, and smirked condescendingly.
After all your talk, it's pathetic you can only afford such a small place.
But again, Ben was mistaken. These aren't for me, they're potential places for you to live, because this house is in my name. Did you forget that? I'm the one paying the mortgage? Ben froze, seemingly having truly forgotten. Did he finally understand that it was he who should leave if we divorced? I can't say I've gathered enough information just from yesterday, but it should help you get started. Frankly, I shouldn't have had to do this research, but I went to the internet cafe and prepared the documents, hoping he'd find a new place quickly. All these properties are not too far from your workplace, and they're affordable on your salary. My mention of income seemed to irritate Ben further.
Don't joke with me.
In the past, I might have rushed to appease him, but I now realized that was a waste of effort. After all, the truth about his lower income needed to be acknowledged for us to move forward. It's because I've always been too considerate that this has happened. Before we were married, I thought he was a bit unreliable but a kind person, and I didn't care about his income, so we got married. If he had just accepted the facts as they are and acted appropriately, things wouldn't have come to this. You know, I think you understand this, but from now on there will be no more allowances, so we have to make your father and mother financially independent, okay? I thought I was just stating the obvious, but Ben immediately turned red and burst out in anger when he heard it.
My parents live on their pension. Are you telling me to abandon my elderly parents?
Faced with Ben's outcry, I sighed. That's what pensions are for, to live within their means. It's ridiculous to ask for allowances just to live luxuriously.
But...
Ben tried to argue but couldn't find the right words. It's unlikely that those two, already accustomed to a luxurious lifestyle, could adapt to a frugal life now. But it's okay. If things go well, your father can manage to live behind the bars. Then the only person who will need living expenses is your mother. We can manage that for one person.
What? What do you mean?
Surprised by Ben, I urged him. Remember what your father did to me yesterday? Seeing that he still didn't understand, I reluctantly explained. You see it often in comics and dramas, like throwing water or coffee at someone, but legally that can also be considered assault. In other words, my father-in-law could be prosecuted for throwing wine on me. Actually, before I came home yesterday, I had already consulted with the police. The officer was kind and sympathetic as he saw me soaking wet and smelling of alcohol from my hair and clothes, but honestly, I am still anxious. It's clear I was victimized, but there's no physical evidence that my father-in-law did it. All the witnesses are relatives, and if any of them protect my father-in-law, there might not be enough evidence for prosecution. But I didn't plan to tell Ben that.
Are you really trying to put your own parent-in-law, even if by marriage, behind bars? You heartless, ungrateful person.
Even as he yelled, I felt nothing. Who's the ungrateful one? You can't live without my allowances. Well, you probably didn't know that because of your actions, but that's just unacceptable. I had done most of the work preparing for yesterday's banquet. Even that alone should have earned me some gratitude from my in-laws, but they took it for granted. That treatment was indeed the epitome of ungrateful. But Ben still had a sulky expression as I delivered the final blow. You seem to forget, but the relatives were watching them, weren't they? If they are decent, they'll tell you how terribly your parents treated me. It seems neither my in-laws nor Ben was aware of the others watching them during the incident. By confronting him with this reality, Ben finally seemed to understand that his family would be isolated if things continued this way.
No joke. If you leave under these circumstances, my parents and I will be blamed by all our relatives.
Yes. I nodded, seeing Ben's pale face. If we divorced after what had happened, it would be clear where the fault lay without needing to explain.
Yes. If you come back, everything will be resolved. It was just a little prank.
I grimaced deeply at that. Why should I cover for you? It's your own doing. Clean up your own mess. But Ben's reluctance to give up was the only admirable thing about him.
No, I really don't want a divorce. I love you.
Ignoring him, I carefully placed the already filled out divorce papers in my bag. Just leave quickly. With that, I hurried off to the municipal office. Later, my father-in-law was arrested for throwing the drink on me. No one protected him, and solid testimonies were given, partly because someone had recorded the incident on their mobile phone. As a result, my father-in-law now faced a strict trial and criminal charges. Having lost the allowance, my mother-in-law struggled financially and turned to Ben for help, but he couldn't manage without my support. No one in the family was willing to help, knowing the situation. The arguments between my resentful mother-in-law and the verbally abusive Ben continued daily. As for me, I was free from the troubles of the past and could focus on my work with a brighter outlook. Thanks to this, my performance at work improved, and there were talks of a promotion. Being competent at work is not a shortcoming as a woman. It's one of my strengths. From now on, I've decided to live as myself, without associating with those who belittle me.
I went ahead and got a divorce. I'll be taking the house as part of the settlement. You have no say in it. After saying that, Nick left the hospital room. My pleas to wait and my willingness to discuss were all ignored by him. This is how I was abandoned. Left alone while dealing with cancer. Yet, somehow, the lingering frustration in my heart seemed to have dissipated. Perhaps, by this point, my love for Nick had already faded. Nick, who toyed with me and repeatedly acted selfishly, deserves divine retribution. Thinking so, I began to devise a scenario for revenge. My name is Michelle Brown, a housewife in her 50s. I live with my husband, Nick. We have no children, and I thought we had been supporting each other throughout our marriage. At least, I had been. But between Nick and me, a gap had formed that would never be filled. Generally, a marriage is about supporting each other, striving together, and filling what lacks in one another. However, there was none of that between us. Hey, where's my dinner? If you don't make it quickly, it's going to be a problem. I had been out on an errand. When I returned home, Nick, who had the day off, poked his head out from his room and demanded his meal. There are no breaks for a housewife. Because if I neglect household chores even for a day, our life falls into disarray. Meanwhile, Nick, a regular office worker, had days off. However, he spent these holidays only for himself. Even though I was busy with various things, in our 30 years of marriage, Nick had never once offered to help. Housework is the job of a housewife. It's only natural for a working adult not to shirk their duties. That was Nick's reasoning, and even if I was sick, he never allowed me to take a break from household duties. Sometimes, I was so sick that it was hard even to get up. Yet, when it was time to eat, Nick would come to my room and insist, make the meal. He never showed any intention of caring for me when I was ill. On the contrary, I have plans with friends, he would say, and leave the house alone, returning late at night, drunk. Marriage is about supporting each other, that's why I married Nick. However, Nick and I had vastly different views of marriage. I tried various things to bridge this difference when we were newly married. But no matter how much I tried to talk, Nick never admitted he might be wrong and harshly scolded me, saying, "Don't complain when you're just a housewife." My love for Nick had long since faded. It's not that I was thinking of leaning on Nick or anything like that. Just that I am human too, and there are days when I suffer. So it would be nice if he could support me a little during such times. But even that notion was not acknowledged by Nick. From the moment I realized this, the distance between Nick and me gradually widened. Eventually, I no longer felt like facing Nick, and as the days passed, even seeing his face became a burden. Our relationship had completely cooled off. I knew better than anyone that continuing this relationship would not be good. Then, a change occurred in my body. I had always been prone to illness, but this felt clearly wrong. So I contacted my father at my home, and he took me to the hospital. There, I was diagnosed with cancer. Fortunately, it was discovered early, so there was a chance for treatment. I immediately asked my father to pick up the essential belongings from our house. And I proceeded with the hospital admission procedures. Nick was at work, so I briefly messaged him that I had cancer and was going to be admitted for treatment right away. Honestly, the image of cancer treatment being difficult and a painful struggle made me extremely anxious about what lay ahead. And at that time, the person who came to mind was Nick. I thought I had fallen out of love. But perhaps, deep down, I wanted to face Nick and spend time together as a couple. Now, weakened as I was, maybe even the cold, inconsiderate Nick, who had never shown concern for me, would worry and ask, "Are you okay?" He might even offer some kind words. Even if he visited just once, that would have been enough. I wanted to see Nick's face just once. I wondered if he would struggle with daily life without me. I felt sorry now that I could no longer do the housework. However, no matter how many days I waited, Nick never showed up. My messages were read, but not a single word came back, not even a simple okay. It was as if he didn't care about me at all. Despite having cancer and being so weakened, Nick showed no signs of concern for me. This fact shook my head deeply, causing me unimaginable pain. I knew it was foolish of me to have expectations. But is it really so bad to want some concern from your husband when you are weak? Is it so unforgivable? I had no intention of being a burden to Nick. I just wanted him to worry about me, to care for me, even if just a little. Even this small selfishness was not allowed for me. I decided to stop expecting anything from Nick. Switching my thoughts, I fought against cancer desperately. As expected, the battle with the disease was agonizing. The medication surely broke down my body. And there were many nights when I was too ill to sleep at all. I often thought about stopping the treatment and just letting my deteriorating body meet its end. Every time, my parents' encouraging words, "You'll surely get better," forced me to muster my weakened will and keep going. One day, feeling ill, I was staring blankly at the ceiling in my hospital bed when the door to the room suddenly opened. My parents weren't scheduled to visit that day, so I wondered who it could be as I looked up, and there was Nick. Had he finally come to check on me, worried about how I was doing? Seeing my face, so emaciated and haggard, I worry if Nick might dislike me even more. Various thoughts race through my mind, leaving me speechless. Meanwhile, Nick sits on a chair next to the bed, quietly observing me, and then laughs. "So this is what cancer does to you? You look terrible, hardly like a woman at all." Those words send a chill down my spine. Such words should never be spoken to me, still fighting cancer. I wish he would say no more. But despite my feelings, Nick continues with even harsher words. "Life has been truly wonderful without you. The house is falling apart, but I'm hardly ever there. Life without you is so much easier." His heartless words wound me again. Why must I be subjected to such words? Why doesn't he say anything that shows he cares? Even though I want to confront Nick, my weakened body fails to respond. And I can only silently receive his harsh words. I stare at him with vacant eyes. Then, noticing my gaze, Nick laughs mockingly and says something unbelievable. "I went ahead and got a divorce. I'll be taking the house as part of the settlement. You have no say in it." My vision blurs. He divorced me without my consent? Why? As I remain silent, Nick continues to speak. "I've fallen in love with someone else. She's 20 years younger, but it's serious. You were in the way of our relationship. He had an affair." That thought crosses my mind, but after saying what he wanted, Nick starts preparing to leave. "Wait," I say, but Nick doesn't listen. There's no love left for me in him. Realizing this hurts, but then it no longer mattered. Understood. As I say that, Nick laughs contentedly and leaves the hospital room. From then on, I fought even harder in my battle against cancer. Despite the difficulties, I held firm in my resolve to fully recover from cancer and regain my health, diligently undergoing treatment. Living like this for 2 days. It might seem short, but for me, unable to sleep properly at night, those 2 days felt very long. Whether the divorce Nick mentioned actually took place or if it was just his way of unsettling me, I wasn't sure, but I was managing somehow. Above all, I had a secret plan to thoroughly bring Nick down. Realizing this would surely unsettle even the unfeeling Nick. In his panic, he would surely try to contact me. Thinking this, I waited, and just today, Nick called. Since I couldn't take the call in the hospital room, I ignored it. However, Nick persisted, calling repeatedly. Though I had set my phone to silent, it was annoyingly persistent. So I messaged him, "Stop calling, it's annoying," and he finally stopped. But then he started sending messages, "Please, I need to talk." Just once, I apologize for everything. He must have thought messaging was the next best option. Each of these words was meant to protect himself. Probably, Nick had realized why I had so easily accepted the divorce he initiated without my permission. "Can I come to see you?" When I didn't respond, perhaps out of frustration, Nick sent that message. To be honest, facing Nick now, in the midst of my exhausting treatment, felt torturous, but if I refused, I knew he would pester me with more calls. So I replied, "Yes, you can come." Now, my revenge begins. Nick, who has mishandled our relationship for so long and divorced me without my consent, deserves a harsh punishment. As I eagerly await Nick's arrival, I am resolved to drag him through hell. Hey! What is the meaning of this? With that angry shout, Nick enters the hospital room. His tone is clearly desperate, showing he is mentally cornered. To an outsider, Nick's demeanor might seem overly anxious. But it's only natural for him to panic like this. After all, I was hiding a truly significant secret. You never told me you had assets worth $10 million. If I knew about this money, I wouldn't have divorced you. Saying this, Nick places my bank account statement on the table. The document clearly shows a deposit of over $10 million. Because you didn't ask. How could anyone guess that a mere housewife like you had such wealth? If I knew there was so much money, I wouldn't have divorced you. It's your fault for divorcing me without properly checking. Don't talk nonsense. And how did you even get this wealth? Nick, who divorced me without my consent and now complains. Why didn't you tell me? I wouldn't have divorced you if you had, shows his self-centered nature. I decide to reveal the truth to Nick. In fact, this $10 million came from investments I started as a hobby. It was my parents who suggested I try investing. Even though Nick's salary was sufficient for our lives as a couple, I still wanted to contribute to our finances. My father, knowledgeable in investing, taught me everything from scratch when I showed interest. Under my father's guidance, I started small, aiming to make even a slight profit. And continued investing. My first investment was about 5 years ago. Since then, I have significantly honed my skills, and now even my father says, I didn't expect you to grow this much. I have managed to earn a considerable amount of money through investing. The $10 million recorded in the bank statement was the profit made over 5 years. I was actually planning to tell you when the time was right. But before I could, I got cancer, and you divorced me without listening. I never intended to take this secret to the grave. Once the cancer was cured and I could return to normal life, I plan to reveal this $10 million asset to Nick, to continue our life together as husband and wife. And share it with him. But before that time came, Nick divorced me on his own. It's absurd to give a share to someone who is no longer my spouse. And now that it has come to this $10 million will all be mine. Hearing my story, Nick's face turns red with anger, and he shouts. If I had known you had this much money, I wouldn't have divorced you. It's your fault for not telling me right away and hiding it. Pay me compensation now. $10 million. Make amends for hiding things from your husband. Nick, either confused by the large sum or unable to accept that he cannot have the money, makes an outrageous demand. Since we are divorced, no matter how things might turn, there is absolutely no way I would give this $10 million to Nick. Yet Nick tries to claim the $10 million, which is just out of reach, suggesting something truly absurd. And I can't help but chuckle. Seeing me laugh, Nick yells, "What are you laughing at? Stop taking me for a fool. I've always hated your attitude. How dare a mere wife have such assets? Don't you think it's presumptuous? A wife's assets belong to her husband. So, give me those assets." What do you mean, a wife's assets belong to her husband? I never intended to keep this money a secret forever. You divorced me on your own before I could tell you. Don't give me that nonsense. It's all your fault for keeping secrets. Despite claiming I'm spouting nonsense, Nick turns red-faced and verbally attacks me whenever I speak. Honestly, as someone still recovering, Nick's shouting is a bit too much for me. Ringing painfully in my head. I knew well that trying to talk any further was pointless. Nick would surely not listen to anything I said and try to paint me as the villain. Realizing it was impossible to discuss anything with Nick made my decision quick. Enough already. You were the one who divorced me, weren't you? You filed for divorce without my consent, right? I always thought your attitude was terrible, but I didn't think it was this bad. When one reaches their limit, can they really harbor so much anger? What I felt in my heart wasn't the pain of cancer, but anger towards Nick. Raising my voice would undoubtedly affect my body, but more than that, the anger towards Nick, who had blamed me with all the words he could think of while shamelessly sitting beside my bed, was overwhelming. What do you think I felt when I got cancer? I thought maybe Nick would worry about me a little, maybe he'd change his heart and care for me. But what did you do? You never showed up to visit me, and when you finally came, you said you had filed for divorce and would take the house. After all that, to come and blame me when you find out I have these assets, are you joking? I've said it before, but I never intended to keep it hidden forever. I was going to tell you when the time was right. You broke that chance yourself. I had never blamed Nick like this before. I always accepted Nick's selfish actions, and still, because we were married. Because I wanted to continue as husband and wife, I never really reprimanded or got my temper. Always trying my best for Nick. I could still try because I had love for Nick. I truly loved him. But now, I have no such feelings for Nick. All that's left is incredible anger and disbelief towards Nick, who only says selfish things. How does one become such a self-centered person? What kind of upbringing leads one to become so devoid of consideration for others? I'm speechless with astonishment, but ultimately, questioning it is pointless because a person who cheats and divorces without agreement can't be thinking properly. Please, she found out you have $10 million and said she'd divorce me if I don't bring some of it back. If I don't get the $10 million, I'll be alone. Don't you still love me? Don't you want to help someone you love? It seems the woman he cheated with also knows I have $10 million in assets. Nick must have told her. Birds of a feather flock together, it seems. From what Nick says, his mistress is quite greedy about money as well. It feels almost like it's someone else's problem. So much so that Nick's circumstances no longer matter to me. And I can easily dismiss any suffering he may face in the future as irrelevant. I'm really begging you. I'll do anything. Please give me the $10 million. If not, I'll be in serious trouble. Please help me. Saying this, Nick kneels on the spot, asking. I had never seen Nick so desperate, and while his display seemed utterly ridiculous, it also brought a sense of disappointment and despair because he had never shown such concern for me. The more we talk, the colder my feelings towards Nick grow. I feel it's pointless to talk anymore. Continuing to deal with this rotten man will not lead to my happiness. I couldn't help but feel foolish for having suffered so much because of such a selfish man. And also for hoping that he might show up during my illness. Despite my feelings, Nick desperately pleads, please. I'm begging you. Help me. But listening to Nick's words any further was the greatest pain of all. Please leave. As I say this, Nick responds with a wheedling tone, don't say that. Even that was irritating to me now. I press the nurse call button and ask a nurse to come. I explain the situation and ask them to remove Nick, and they call security to escort him out. Please listen to me. I can't do this without you. He continued to proclaim this until the end, but I no longer listened to Nick's words. He has visited the hospital several times since, but the nurses, knowing the situation, ensure he cannot reach my room. I heard from a friend that Nick, unable to get the $10 million, was dumped by his mistress and is now single. As for me, I continued to fight cancer with determination, and recently, I finally recovered and was discharged from the hospital. Having overcome my illness, my body feels healthier than ever. And this newfound vitality feels incredibly precious. Now, I'm living a relaxed life, slowly spending the $10 million I saved up. Honestly, now at 50, I've had enough of marriage, and I'll probably end my life alone. Living out my life unattached to anyone doesn't seem so bad anymore.